Okay, we'll start with this. Newly crowned two-time IBF junior middleweight champion Marie-Eve Caire of Canada took to social media to call out none other than newly crowned WBA junior middleweight champion Rankin of Scotland. She said, "Hey, Team Rankin, still interested in a unification bout?"
I've talked about this fight in previous videos.
Seems all but an eventuality at this point in a division where you really only have about 48 ranked fighters around the world. The who's who fighters, they really can't afford to stay away from each other. The Rankins, Marie-Eve Caires, Patricia Pagults of the world, the champions of this division, they have to fight.
One girl's got to separate themselves from the rest
in order to establish themselves as the most dominant force in this division, this weight class, and funnel all challengers to her.
I like this fight.
I don't know if at this time the Marie-Eve Caire people and the Rankin people have already started preliminary talks and preliminary negotiations for what would be a junior middleweight unification match. I don't know if we're there yet, but if we ever get there, you kind of have to give Marie-Eve Caire the edge because she's lighter on her feet, has faster hands, not much power, not much pop, though it's not like she relies on power and strength of arms to win these fights.
Marie-Eve Caire's a pure boxer.
And a southpaw that's completely defensively minded, hit and not get hit, staying on her toes, staying on the move.
And Rankin's more akin to a boxer-puncher.
In a pure boxer versus boxer-puncher kind of matchup, the pure boxer gets the advantage. The pure boxer has the edge. That boxer-puncher likes to set up their shots and tries to pick their punches the same way the pure boxer does, but the pure boxer is a lot more economic and a lot more mobile, thus making it difficult for that boxer-puncher to set up their shots and set their feet.
Throw power.
Pure boxers, so long as they're on the level of a boxer-puncher, have a stylistic advantage over them, whereas boxer-punchers have an advantage over pressure fighters, and pressure fighters have an advantage over pure boxers. That's how that all breaks down, and it just so happens that at this weight, one pure boxer is Marie-Eve Caire, one boxer-puncher is Rankin, who Marie is calling out, and one pressure fighter is Marianne Alborg. Marianne Alborg is not yet as experienced as either Marie-Eve Caire or Rankin, but as far as pressure fighters go, she's one of those.
Marie's got the stylistic edge in a fight with Rankin.
For Hannah to win that fight, she'd have to be characteristically more aggressive than a boxer-puncher is, more aggressive than she usually is, more imposing, more aggressive, throwing more shots.
She'd essentially have to apply pressure.
The way pressure fighters often do, and that's easier said than done for Hannah because Marie-Eve Caire's got faster feet than Hannah, faster hands than Hannah, so staying with her
and on top of her could prove difficult.
This is one of those moments where a good fighter must separate themselves from just being a good fighter among the good fighters to being a great fighter. For Hannah, she must show that she is more than just a boxer-puncher. She can be a pressure fighter and apply that pressure when the situation calls for it. Can she do that?
The good fighters, the really good ones, they have two base styles.
Floyd Mayweather Jr. may have started out a boxer-puncher with lightning-fast hands, but over time he showed he could transition from that into being a pure boxer as well. Canelo Alvarez started out as a boxer-puncher with an affinity for counter-punching, though these days he's more of a pressure fighter when the situation calls for it.
Hannah has to be able to apply pressure to win this fight.
That's her best bet. Canadia's own Marie-Eve Caire gets the edge here if and when this unification match.
If and when this fight gets made.
In other news, per a tweet from Michael Benson, Eddie Hearn has stated that he's now made a very big offer to Anthony Yarde for the Joshua Buatsi fight. He added that he also made an offer to Craig Richards. If I'm being honest, which really just means I'm being pessimistic, I don't expect Anthony Yarde to take the fight, for more reasons than one. Yeah, there's the Eddie Hearn, Frank Warren political side of things, but there's also Anthony Yarde being in a pole position to challenge Joe Smith Jr. for the WBO title if things between Joe and Artur don't work out. If they don't do that unification match, in all likelihood, Anthony Yarde will end up facing Joe Smith Jr. And with those things in mind, I don't expect to see this fight happen.
This fight's been talked about quite a bit over the years.
As far back as when Anthony Yarde was an unbeaten fighter before he suffered his first professional loss on the road against the then reigning WBO champion Sergey Kovalev. I have to say that Anthony Yarde has faced the better quality of competition. He has, Sergey Kovalev.
Even though he lost that fight, he still had it.
The two fights that he had with his domestic rival, Lyndon Arthur, the fight that Anthony Yarde lost, and the subsequent rematch that he won. The rematch that he won by way of knockout. I actually picked Anthony to win that rematch.
Yarde versus Buatsi is a 50-50 fight.
It's a 50-50 fight because Joshua Buatsi comes from a more distinguished amateur background than Anthony Yarde, though these are the pro ranks, not the amateur ranks, and as professionals, Anthony Yarde is more experienced than Joshua Buatsi. He suffered a loss here and there, though all the same, he does bring more experience to the table because he's faced better fighters
He has.
than
Buatsi.
Joshua Buatsi has.
So you think Eddie Hearn has finally come around to the idea of making fights with Frank's boys?
Over a year ago, we saw some enthusiasm from old fish ice Frank Warren to start doing bipartisan fights with the Matchroom kids over there with Eddie's boys. And Eddie didn't seem none too receptive to that idea, though here in 2022 he wants to make a fight with one of Frank's guys at 175 pounds. The hierarchy of thought, the rhyme and the reason behind that, I think, is because
Anthony Yarde's in a pole position to become the WBO's mandatory challenger.
And who's the WBO champion?
Joe Smith Jr. is the WBO champion.
What's a more winnable fight for a guy like Joshua Buatsi? A Dimitri Bivol fight for the WBA or a Joe Smith Jr. fight for the WBO?
No, Joe Smith Jr. fight for the WBO.
Listen, he can put Joshua Buatsi in there with Dimitri Bivol at his leisure, at his discretion. Though if he were to do that inside the next, 1 or 2 fights, I think Dimitri Bivol would outpoint him. And I think he would outpoint Joshua Buatsi comfortably. Whereas Joe Smith Jr., he's a little bit more flawed, a little bit more rough around the edges, a little bit more beatable.
I think Eddie likes Joshua's chances against Joe more than he likes his chances against Dimitri.
So you make an offer to an Anthony Yarde on the premise that you think your guy can beat him, and if he beats him, he moves on from that to a Joe Smith Jr. fight. And if things work out the way you want him to where he's got enough in the tank to beat the likes of a Joe Smith Jr., or at minimum, outpoint him, outbox him, that gets you 2 of the 4 major titles in the light heavyweight division. That's what I think the hierarchy of thought is. Whereas if you just put Joshua in there with Dimitri on the premise,
If you put him in there with Dimitri because it's easy.
if you put him in there with Dimitri on the premise that you want to keep everything in-house, yeah, you make the fight, but Joshua Buatsi might very well lose that fight. And who says that Dimitri Bivol at this time is at liberty to take a fight like that on anyway? Zurdo Ramirez has been calling him out. Zurdo Ramirez, who's in a pole position to become his mandatory challenger. Maybe Joshua Buatsi can't skip ahead of Zurdo in the queue.
Maybe you don't want to have to waste your time dealing with Golden Boy because they're not going to want to make that fight between Joshua and Zurdo anyway.
Maybe not. That's why you make an offer to an Anthony Yarde, and as a contingency, you also make that same offer for a Joshua Buatsi fight to Craig Richards, because if Anthony don't want to fight,
Hey, you still got Craig.
Other news appears to be trouble in paradise in reference to the Hrgovic versus Yoka fight. The IBF heavyweight title elimination bout between Tony Yoka and Philippe Hrgovic is now in jeopardy. Promoter Caire Sarland announced last week that Tony Yoka accepted an IBF heavyweight title eliminator with Philippe Hrgovic, a rematch of the 2016 Olympic super heavyweight semifinal, but the fight is now in jeopardy due to a contract dispute. Yoka, an Olympic gold medalist, signed to fight Martin Boccoli on January 15th in Paris, but the ESPN Plus fight was postponed due to COVID-19 restrictions in France. Bocoli's trainer and manager Billy Nelson told ESPN that the contract stipulated that Yoka's French promoter, All-Star Boxing president Jerome something,
I can't pronounce that guy's name.
decide in writing if the fight is cancelled or postponed.
You mean he hasn't yet?
Subsequent to Sarland's proclamation, Bocoli's legal team sent letters to the IBF petitioning the organization to rule that Yoka is unavailable to participate in the Hrgovic bout due to its rule prohibiting contracted boxers from taking part in other IBF-sanctioned fights. IBF President Daryl Peoples told ESPN that a ruling was imminent. Yoka's cult promoter, Top Rank, has been engaged in negotiations with Sarland for the proposed Hrgovic bout and is taking the lead on the legal battle with the Boccoli side. Top Rank spokesperson Evan Korn declined to comment. People should honor their contracts, shouldn't they? Nelson told ESPN. The IBF's rules are very clear. When you sign a contract, you're unavailable to fight in an eliminator. He's trying to start a new life for himself in the UK. 400,000 euros goes a long way to helping him and his chances of winning the world title himself. The contracted payday is 4.5 times Bacol's career best purse, according to Nelson, who lives just yards away from the fighter outside Glasgow in Green Caire, Scotland. Bacol was splitting time between Scotland and his native Democratic of the Congo over the past few years before moving full-time in October. The brother of the cruiserweight title holder, Lunga Makabu, Bacol has reeled off 6 consecutive wins since a 10th round TKO loss to heavyweight contender Michael Hunter in 2018. Most notably, Bacol scored a unanimous decision victory over Sergey Kuzmin in December 2020. I think you gotta blame the French promoter purely because we have a contract with them that's still valid, Nelson told ESPN. I just think it was very unjust and unfair that you can even talk to somebody when you sign a contract.
Sounds like it's not going to take the IBF too long to make a decision.
Weigh in and rule on the situation. Now, I don't know what they're going to take into consideration when it comes to all of this, because if the situation with COVID and its restrictions hasn't changed in France, then that makes it hard for the Yoka people to honor the contract they have with the Bacoli people.
At which point, if the IBF don't let Tony participate,
they don't let him fight in that final eliminator with Philippe Hrgovic, and the situation in France hasn't changed, what are you holding him up to do? A lot of nothing.
Yeah, that's if the situation hasn't changed. If it has changed,
and those COVID restrictions have been lifted, then that would allow the Yoka people to move forward with the Bacoli fight, even though the Bacoli fight doesn't line them up for a title shot the same way that the Hrgovic fight would.
The Hrgovic fight is a better fight, in my opinion.
And I talked about that when this fight was first announced, when this fight was first tabbed, that this would be yet another meeting of these two guys that have met each other before more than once in the amateur ranks. The Bacoli fight, it's a decent fight, it's a good fight, but it's a fight that I was confident Tony Yoka could win in his native France. At minimum, he could win a decision there.
For me, it was a question of who's more likely to take it out of the judge's hands.
Take it out of the judge's hands in France or anywhere else for that matter. Who's more likely to do that, Martin Bacoli or Philippe Hrgovic? And for my money and from where I was sitting, I feel like
Philippe stands a better chance of knocking out Tony than Martin does.
It's not saying that Martin Bacoli stands no chance at all of knocking out Tony Yoka. I just happen to think Philippe stands a better chance of doing that than Martin, and that's why for me, the Hrgovic fight is the better fight, the more intriguing fight, and there's more on the line because that fight, unlike the Bacoli fight, is an IBF final eliminator. So that's the fight I really have my heart set on. That's the fight I want to see. I don't know if Top Rank can convince Martin to just stand down.
I don't even know if that matters because it's the IBF that's got a rule on this thing.
That's the look of it, and if the IBF rules that Tony can't participate, then Tony can't participate, and we lose that fight. We get Bacoli instead. It's just a question of when, though. Which fight has you more excited? Yoka versus Bacoli or Yoka versus Hrgovic?
Oh man, Philippe's got shit luck getting high-profile opponents, I'll tell you.
So many guys passed on a fight with Philippe so that when he finally finds someone who's capable, willing, and able, and is a blue-chip prospect like himself, this whole fiasco starts.
Man, Philippe's got shit luck getting high-profile opponents, I'll tell you.
If this fight dematerializes, that's what that accents, that's what that displays, that Philippe's just got bad luck getting high-profile fights. Finally, Tevin Farmer posted this via his Twitter account. It reads, Ryan and Farmer. Like that.
Ryan as in Ryan Garcia?
The Ryan Garcia that says he's set to be returning in April. The Ryan Garcia that very recently was in talks to fight Isaac Cruz, but all of that seems to have fallen apart. The Ryan Garcia that says he's going to come back in April, and regardless of who he fights, he's going to win. Is that the Ryan Garcia that former IBF super featherweight champion Tevin Farmer is talking about? Tevin Farmer, who very recently said he's moving up to the lightweight division. Now, both Tevin Farmer and Ryan Garcia,
if they do end up fighting in April,
the both of them will be coming off of lengthy stints of inactivity. Tevin Farmer hasn't fought in something like 2 years. If he comes back in April, it's well over 2 years since that guy had a fight. The last time he was in action,
January of 2020, before the pandemic hit.
January of 2020, before the world went into lockdown 2 years ago.
That's a fight where he lost the red belt to Jojo Diaz at 130 pounds.
Ryan's already been out at least 1 full year. The last time he was in action was in January of last year against Cool Hand Luke Campbell. I'm ambivalent about this fight, I am. These are less than ideal circumstances for a guy like Tevin Farmer to return to action. A guy who'd essentially be moving up from super featherweight up to lightweight. He'd be doing so right off a loss and a lengthy, very lengthy stint of inactivity. For Ryan, it's ideal because Tevin's a naturally smaller guy. He's coming off a loss and a lot of inactivity, more than Ryan.
I'm not completely against the fight.
Because this fight, unlike, say, Thurman versus Barrios, well, that fight's a pay-per-view. This one isn't. This you get to see as part of your DAZN subscription. It doesn't actually cost you an arm and a leg to see Ryan Garcia versus Tevin Farmer. Better still, there would be obvious angling there in favor of Ryan Garcia fighting a naturally smaller fighter who's moving up in weight, hasn't fought in 2 years, and he's coming off a loss. There is very obvious angling there.
Both of these guys have got ring rust to shake off.
The edge and experience has got to go to Tevin Farmer because Tevin, unlike Ryan, can say that he's been a world champion before and a successfully defending champion in at least, 3 to 4 fights, 3 or 4 instances where he successfully defended the red belt. When Tevin was a champion, he was a prolific champion, a very busy champion.
Ryan's bigger, Ryan's younger.
And he hasn't been away from the ring quite as long as Tevin Farmer, so he has those things working for him. But what makes it intriguing and what may be working against Ryan is that, I reiterate, he's not as experienced as Tevin Farmer, and after a full year, what would be over a year if they end up fighting in April, after that amount of time out of action, that could affect Ryan's reflexes, his timing, and his speed, which for Ryan really is his bread and butter.
Tevin's bread and butter is his defense and counterpunching.
What I've always liked about Tevin is that Tevin is a defensively minded fighter, but he's not an outside fighter. He's not a stick and move jabber. He's the kind of defensive fighter that is defensive in the pocket within striking distance. He's actually very good there, though after 2 years out of action, how good is he really? He didn't look himself 2 years ago against Jojo Diaz. I felt something was wrong with him in that fight, though I don't know what it was. I don't know here and now with an absolute certitude that Tevin Farmer is the guy that Ryan Garcia is going to be facing, though you get the sense that that's what Tevin Farmer is hinting at. You get the sense that Tevin, behind the scenes and behind closed doors, he's in the running for Ryan Garcia's big comeback fight.
Ain't that a fucking bitch?
What is?
A guy who's never even been a world champion having a big comeback fight.
Yeah, Ryan was out of action a good chunk of last year. He broke a nail and decided to nurse himself back to health catching rays on the beach.
Look, it is what it is.
Ryan, if he fights Tevin, he's not under much threat of being knocked out. Tevin was never a really big puncher. There is some intrigue in association with this fight, and let's see if this is what they get over the line.
Maybe we get Ryan Garcia versus Tevin Farmer in April.
Just have to wait and see.